everyone, welcome back to 996 The Howl, and I know it sucks. It's unfortunate that the monstrous road trip ended on such a sour note, but it started off good. We could gather some positives out of this, but it was a long journey. At one point in this road trip, the Coyotes were in a playoff spot, but now that it's over, they find themselves 1 point above last place. Obviously, there's some other numbers that they're not so close to last place. Games in hand and all that. I'll get to that later. But let's look at this road trip. Somewhat unprecedented, but not really. Last year, the Islanders went on a 13-game road trip for their arena to be ready for prime time. They went 5-6-2. The year before that, during the whole pandemic, San Jose had to play games in Arizona. That was a 12-game road trip. They went 5-6-1. And then it wasn't the longest road trip in NHL history. They tied it with Vancouver, a 14-game road trip during the Olympics around 2010. Vancouver was really good during that time. They went 8-5-1 in their 14-game road trip. So it ties an NHL record. It isn't the longest road trip ever in the history of the NHL, but it's tied for it. So the Coyotes, they go 4-7-3. To me, in the summer when the schedule was released, this seemed like a daunting road trip, especially starting the season 6 games on the road, then home for only 4 games, then back on the road for 14. I didn't know how they were gonna do it. I was frightened. My expectation was that this road trip would tank their season and they would officially be last place by a mile. Didn't sort of end up that way. And also, once you were in the road trip, there were some other nuances to it. They did come home for 2, stops. They didn't play games, but they did have, 3 or 4 days after some games. I think between the Rangers and Vegas game, they had like 3 days in Arizona. And then after the Minnesota game, maybe 2 days in Arizona. So they did manage to get home, do some laundry, some dry cleaning, see their families. But officially, it was 14 games in a row playing hockey games. So let's get into it. Their numbers, you know, um, the Edmonton game really skewed some of these numbers, especially the goals against per game. It was below 3 goals against per game before the Edmonton game. So I was so happy. Like, finally, the Coyotes are allowing less than 3 goals per game. But no, had to go and ruin it with an 8-2 loss. So goals against per game, since I'm talking about it, 3.28. Pretty remarkable how that one Edmonton game increased it by a quarter goal per game. Just one bad game in a 14 games collection sample could over skew the numbers. Goals for, it's still in that spot of 2.5 to 2.75. They finished with 2.5 goals per game. Still middling offense. Could rarely get over that 3 goal hump. They kind of did it consistently here. 5 games in a row of scoring 3 or more. So if they could manage to do that more consistently, that will be good. But their special teams took a huge hit in this road trip. Remember, around the 10-game mark, they were like top 10 in power play, top 10 in penalty kill. All the fans, the broadcasting team were hyping this power play that the Coyotes had. In the back of my mind, I knew this was unsustainable, but I didn't expect it to nosedive this much, especially with the additions of Chychrun and Schmaltz, where they joined in the halfway point of the road trip against Nashville. But it's the power plays taking a nosedive. It's hard for them to gain entry on power plays now. It seems like the Michelli and Krause unit, which is PP2, is better than the Keller and Schmaltz power play. I feel like since Schmaltz came back on that first power play unit, it's been weak and unproductive. But that Michelli power play unit has been good. Somewhat good, better than PP1. Their penalty killing, they took 65 penalties in 14 games, which is like above 4 penalties per game. Some games they took way too much, like the New Jersey game, they had 7 penalties they took. The Vancouver game, 8 penalties. undisciplined, unresponsible, and watching the broadcast last night. Finally, I usually don't watch intermissions, but during the I think it was the first intermission, they had an interview with the head coach Andre Tourney, and he said they didn't really practice this whole road trip, and you can't really practice on the road. You do get your morning skates, but you can't really dive down into the details of a hockey game. So that may be the reason why their special teams were so bad. You don't really get time to practice those special teams when you're on the road. And that you add new players in Chikrin and Schmaltz, it's hard to get that chemistry going. And their positions on the ice are going to be different now that Schmaltz is on the power play. He has his own spot, so the configuration of the power play gets reconfigured once a new player comes back onto that unit. But also I want to talk about, because they're so undisciplined and unresponsible, maybe because they don't have enough practice time, that feeds into that as well. Especially, Michelli was scratched for 2 games on this road trip, not because he was playing bad, but he was taking a lot of undisciplined penalties, and when you don't have practice time, you can't really teach them to not do it. So maybe that's why, because they didn't have practice time, maybe the scratches were a way to tell him, hey, you got to learn from your mistakes. This is what you got to fix. Because of the no practice time to teach the bad habits out of him, the only option you have left is to scratch him. Undeserved scratches, I would say, but if the coaching staff really believes he was unresponsible and undisciplined, then that's the only way they can discipline him. Let's look at the players who performed well on this road trip. Keller, even though Keller has 1 point in his last 4 games played, he's been a bit cold for some reason. Usually he was on every game up until they kind of went to Western Canada. But 4 goals, 8 assists, 12 points in 14 games. Usually he's a point per game player, so he's just under that. He's got to get his mojo back. Maybe more practice time with Schmaltz and Boyd gets that line chemistry back to where he is a point per game. Michelli, like I said, scratched for 2 games on the road trip, performed really well. 10 points in 12 games. Again, more assists than goals. I know he's got a great shot. We'll love to see him shoot a bit more, but he's feeding Lawson Krause. As you can see, he still rarely gets assists. In fact, he only has 2 assists on the season, and they both came in the same game. I believe it was a Montreal game. So pretty crazy statistics there. But yeah, Krause, 5 goals, leading goal scorer in the 14 games played. And then Gossespierre, bit of a seesaw with him. At some points, I'm disappointed in him, and then in other nights, he manages to get on the scoreboard. 2 goals, 8 assists, 10 points in 14 games. It's good as game points. I think the more points he gets, the bigger the trade value increases. I'm not looking at him to be a defensive stalwart or, make good plays away from the puck. If he's going to get traded, the teams are going to look at his point production, look at his power play production. So the more points he gets, hopefully they get a first round pick for him. And then JJ Moser, good to see him there offensively. 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points in 14 games. Now his defensive game is starting to take a bit of a hit. He got walked around by Kopitar in that Los Angeles game. Didn't like the game he had against Edmonton, even though most of the team had terrible games. But it seems like the wheels are coming off a bit on Moser. I always looked at him as being a great defensive defenseman who also has offensive upside. But, it's just not working the past few games. So hopefully, I'm going to say this a lot, more practice time makes him better and gets him back to that level where we expect him to be. Because as of right now, not really liking his defensive game. I know he could do so much better, so he's got to fine-tune that a bit. Chikrin, so he only played 8 games. Like I said, he joined the team against Nashville halfway through the road trip, but he's got 7 points in 8 games, including 3 goals. This guy's a menace out there. He looks awesome. Looks like he hasn't missed a beat. He's going to get that value that Bill Armstrong sent out publicly. I believe it's 2 firsts or 2 first round equivalents. So that means players who were drafted in the first round. Um, Unbelievable. Really happy with Chikrin. Really don't have any negatives to say about him. I said in a previous video that there was a small fear in my mind that his trade value would go and decrease because of all these injuries. Maybe it took a hit to his talent level and skill level and on ice production, but it hasn't. You don't even remember he was ever injured. So the fact that he's come back and recovered to pretty much 100% is a great sign, and hopefully he continues it. And maybe we see a trade for Chikrin near the end of December, maybe January. Maybe they don't wait until the trade deadline if his production value, is at a peak right now. So if you wait till the trade deadline, maybe in February, this is all hypothetical. Like, let's say his production decreases in February, then that takes a hit to his trade value. So I think he's at a peak right now. He could ride that peak for December, but Bill Armstrong's got to find the right time and right package to execute the trade, and hopefully he gets the greatest value possible for Chikrin. We've seen him done it before. Look at Ekman Larson and Garland. He got a 9th overall pick for that. Look at Dvorak. They got a first-round pick for Dvorak. I mean, Kemper, they got a first-round pick for Kemper. So Bill Armstrong does get his value, even though those trades are lopsided. Like, Dvorak is not worth a first-round pick. Garland and Ekman Larson is not worth 9th overall. Kemper, you could argue, he did win a cup for the Avalanche, but he didn't really steal the cup for them. They just needed a somewhat average or above average consistent goaltending, and he provided it for him. So Bill Armstrong does get his trade value, so he's not going to cave. I trust him, and he should get it done, and we should all be happy when it happens. And then Nick Bukestad had a great night against Nashville, 6 points in 14 games. And I already talked about Lawson Krause. Disappointing players, pretty much our third line. Hayden, Gunther, Ritchie, Cassian. I know Cassian and Ritchie kind of rotate that third line position. To be fair to Cassian, he's only played 5 games on this road trip because of his injury. But Nick Ritchie, he was scratched the last 3 games, and he's only had 4 points in 11 games on this road trip. I know we meme about Nick Ritchie, but to be honest, he started the season off really hot, getting those goals, shooting the puck, getting to good scoring chances. But, the past few games, when he wasn't scratched, just didn't see any impact he was having on the game. Zach Cassian is a ghost out there. I don't see any value he brings to this lineup. I know they dressed him because of, he's coming back to Edmonton, his former team. But moving forward, I don't know. Cassian's got to be scratched, work on his game, and just find a way to get an impact on his team and be in the lineup. Even on hits, he rarely hits too. He makes bad passes. I just feel like Cassian and Ritchie are bringing Hayden down. And then we talk about Hayden, still no goal on the season. He's got 3 points on the year, 3 assists. They all came on this road trip. I was hoping, I believe he went on a 3-game point streak with those 3 assists in the beginning of the road trip. But since then, he's kind of been unnoticeable offensively. I know in the details of the game, the coaches love him. He's our best face-off guy. He goes to the net and screens the goalie. He plays on the PK. He does the small things right. But the moral victories can only go so far. We're almost a third into the season now, and being drafted 5th overall, signing that contract, even though it's not a lot of dollars, but we expect him to do much more. We expect him to be, his ceiling's like a second-line center now, but he could barely provide a third-line center production. So hoping Hayden could turn it around. Like I said, you only could say, he does the details right. He does the things away from the puck right for so long. At some point, he's got to get on the score sheet. Because, some people might say it's unfair that Cassian and Ritchie get scratched, but especially Ritchie, because he actually gets points and produces, but Hayden doesn't get scratched. You only could argue for Hayden for so long before you just look at the stats and say, you know what? You're kind of not doing it for us. Gunther's got 5 points in the 12 games he's played on this road trip. Like Michelli, he was scratched for 2 of these games. Just, I want more out of Gunther. Maybe my expectations are a bit high. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about Gunther. I'm a bit underwhelmed with him since he officially made the team. I know he's good for like one really good scoring chance per game. I would love to see him shoot and hit the net a bit more. He's got a great shot just like Michelli, but he's got to use it more. Just start shooting pucks on net. I see Michelli more as a playmaker, and Michelli is always making a good play and the right play whenever he touches the puck. He's finding guys wide open. For Gunther, I don't see that. I don't see that playmaking ability, and I don't see him shooting a lot of pucks. So I'm not really sure what you can say he's really good at. I know the coaches are praising him for his play away from the puck, but just like Hayden, you're a ninth overall pick. You got to get on that score sheet more consistently. And then I talked about Richie and Hayden and Cassian. The games they've played, they started the road trip on a 3-game win streak. They had a big win against Carolina. They had a couple extra time losses. So this road trip hasn't been so bad, even though they've dropped down in the standings from a wild card spot. They're 1 point away from last place, even though they have a lot of games in hand on, let's say, Anaheim, who has 17 points. Coyotes have 18, but Coyotes have 3 games in hand. Then you look at San Jose. San Jose has 21 points, but Coyotes have 5 games in hand on San Jose. So if the Coyotes got a little bit of a run, a little bit of a point streak, they could kind of ruin their tank chances and lottery chances. So they're not they're not like part of the tank, going to get first overall or second overall just yet. They have a lot of games in hand. So I thought, like I said earlier in the video, this road trip would tank their season and be last place for sure by like more than 2 points, but they're still in the mix. They're still around some other teams like Chicago and Columbus, who also have 18 points as well. So it didn't tank their season so much. They're still treading water in terms of lottery odds and getting that high lottery odd chance. They had 3 regulation losses in a row here, but I felt they played pretty good games in these games. The Ranger game, the Coyotes dominated that game, but if you look at the scoreboard, they lost 4-1. Against Vegas, they didn't play too well, but it was a 1-0 game going into the third period. Vegas is like the second best team in the league, so the fact that they went toe to toe with them, only down 1 goal, that game could have went their way if they just produced a little bit more in that third period. I loved the Nashville game. I loved this stretch of games against Nashville, Carolina, and Detroit. So these overtime and extra time, shootout, overtime losses, to me, I take them as wins. That's why I'm not so down on this road trip, even though their record looks bad. To me, if the Coyotes are going to extra time, that's a win for me. It shows that they're competitive in the game. They didn't take, the opposition lightly. They worked hard. They were energized. They kept the game close. So that's a win for me. Like the fact that this season was advertised as another tank year, another miserable year. This road trip has not been miserable aside from last night. So kudos for the Coyotes for 14 games in a row. I was getting up to watch every game. They were entertaining. They were watchable. Again, except for last night. That's pretty much all I have to say. I also wanted to say you couldn't really hide in this schedule. There's no bad teams on this schedule. You can say the 2 worst teams here were Buffalo and Vancouver, but they're not bad teams. I don't think they're bad. I think they're underperforming. And Vancouver's been playing a lot of good hockey lately, even Buffalo. So there weren't any weak teams. There's no Columbus, no Ottawa, no Anaheim, no San Jose, no Chicago. You couldn't hide in this road trip. They faced some stiff competition, and to be honest, I think they did an okay job. I know last night is overshadowing the feeling of this road trip, but I thought it was average. I thought it was okay. It exceeded my expectation, like I said in this video numerous times, where I expected this road trip to tank, and they would be ruined and just put down in the basement. But they're still chugging along. They're still playing competitive games, a lot of competitive losses, which is what I want to see. I want to see them have competitive losses. I don't want to see last night happen again consistently. It happened twice at the beginning of the season, the first two games of the season, but it happened, their last home game against Dallas. But since then, 13 games in a row, and then finally they reached their breaking point with an unwatchable game and just a miserable, abysmal hockey performance. But hopefully they bounce back. They got to bounce back pretty quickly. They got a game Friday night against Boston, I think is the best team in the league. So not a lot of practice time. I think they're just going to go home, sleep, enjoy the sun, and then get back to work Friday. But, as long as they keep those games like the Edmonton game at bay, it doesn't creep into their schedule, it doesn't become a bad habit. I'm happy with the team, and then we can talk about where they stand in terms of lottery odds in the new year. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. We made it through. Andre Tourney said that physically the players didn't feel the road trip at all, but mentally it kind of got into them. It's hard to be on the road so much, sleeping in hotels almost every night. So it's good that physically pretty much all the players made it through. No terrible injuries. In fact, Chychrun and Schmaltz were able to come back into the lineup and recover from their injuries. So that's great to see how they didn't go through injury problems. And we'll see where they take it from here. Again, thank you for watching. And if you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.